She was just a waitress, overlooked, underpaid, and dismissed. But when she showed a stranger kindness, everything changed. That man turned out to be the owner of the restaurant empire she worked for, and what happened next shocked everyone. This is the story of Naomi Ellis, and how one act of compassion turned into a national movement of justice, power, and second chances. The dinner rush had just begun at Harvest Table, a modest but bustling restaurant tucked into a quiet strip of downtown Raleigh, North Carolina. Naomi Ellis, 28, balanced two trays on her forearms, weaving through the maze of booths with the precision of someone who'd done it 1,000 times before. Her uniform was crisp, but her shoes worn and faded, hinted at the wear of double shifts and long nights. Most people didn't see her, not really. To customers, she was just Miss, or Hey You. To her coworkers, she was the dependable one, the one who never complained, never challenged the system, and always picked up the slack when others dropped it. But beneath Naomi's calm eyes was a weight most couldn't imagine. She wasn't working just for herself. Her younger brother Darius was halfway through his engineering degree on a scholarship that didn't cover rent, books, or food. Their parents were long gone. Every dollar Naomi earned was stretched thin across bills, tuition support, and the quiet promise she'd made to her late mother to keep Darius afloat. So when the system bent unfairly, Naomi held her tongue. Until the night she didn't. It was just past 8:30 p.m. when a man stepped into the restaurant. He looked ordinary, gray slacks, a navy jacket, no tie, mid-50s maybe, with neatly cropped salt and pepper hair, and a gait that suggested quiet confidence. He walked in, stood patiently by the "Please wait to be seated" sign, and was promptly ignored. The host, Tristan, glanced at him once and looked away. Kylie, another waitress, leaned on the counter, scrolling through her phone, ignoring the man entirely. The man shifted his weight, waiting, still nothing. Naomi noticed she'd seen it happen before, how certain guests got passed over, usually older, or if they didn't look like big tippers. This man wasn't flashy. He wasn't loud. But there was something in the way he stood alert, observant, that made her pause. Without thinking, Naomi grabbed a menu, wiped her hands, and approached. "Evening, sir," she said, smiling warmly. "Table for one." He looked at her, and something in his eyes softened. "Yes, thank you." She led him to a booth near the window, poured him a glass of water, and offered to start him off with coffee or a special. When she walked away to place his order, she didn't notice Kylie's raised eyebrow, but the man did. Naomi returned with his meal herself, a grilled salmon plate with roasted vegetables and a side of warm sourdough. She had picked it out herself after he'd hesitated with the menu. The man's eyes widened slightly. "I didn't order yet." She smiled. "You look like you hadn't eaten all day." "If I'm wrong, I'll eat it." He chuckled, then thanked her softly. Naomi didn't expect anything in return. That wasn't the point. She just didn't like seeing people dismissed, especially not here. She stayed a few moments, made sure he had everything, and then returned to the chaos of the floor. Behind her, whispers began. "That guy didn't even order anything fancy," Kylie muttered. "Why's she playing Waitress of the Year now?" Tristan snorted. "Bet she's hoping for a tip," but Naomi didn't hear them. She was too busy making sure the silverware was polished and that Table 7's kid got a second lemonade. By the time she turned back, the man was gone. No scene, just a quiet exit and a tip on the table barely touched. It wasn't money that stayed with her. It was the way he looked at her before leaving. Like he knew something. The next morning, Naomi arrived early. She liked beating the rush, taking a moment to breathe before another 12-hour shift. But as soon as she clocked in, something felt off. Tristan barely looked at her. Kylie avoided eye contact, and manager Paul Langston stood near the kitchen, arms crossed, watching her like she was late, even though she wasn't. Naomi. He called my office. Inside, Paul didn't sit. He just stood behind his desk like a prosecutor. "You served someone last night a full entree without charging," he said flatly. Naomi blinked. It was a small gesture, the man he hadn't even ordered yet. Our policy," Paul snapped. "Nothing free, no exceptions, not unless cleared by management." But it was a $10 plate, she argued, voice tight. He was alone. He looked. Paul's hand sliced the air. "That's not your call, and frankly, we don't need charity cases." "Naomi, you're a waitress, not a social worker." The words stung more than she let show. "We're letting you go. Effective immediately." She stared. "You're firing me over one meal." "No," he said. "I'm firing you for not knowing your place." She didn't remember driving home. The silence in the apartment was thick when she stepped inside. Darius was gone for the week, some out-of-town robotics competition, so there was no one to see her crumple onto the couch. Her apron still smelled like fryer grease. Her hands trembled as she opened her phone to check her balance. $114.27. Rent was due in 10 days. Naomi stared at the wall, heart-racing tears finally spilling. She'd done the right thing. She knew it, and she was punished for it anyway. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She hesitated, then answered, Miss Ellis. A deep, calm voice said, "This is Graham Weaver. We met last night at Harvest Table." She sat up. "The customer?" "No," he said slowly. "Not exactly. Silence. I own the restaurant. In fact, I own the entire Harvest Table chain." Naomi's breath caught. "I was there undercover, evaluating service, culture, integrity," he said. "And what I saw last night was deeply disappointing. Except for you," she blinked. "Wait, I'd like to speak with you, Naomi," he said. "In person, tomorrow morning." Her voice shook. "About what?" "A job," he replied. "The one your manager thought you weren't ready for." Naomi barely slept. She replayed the phone call in her head, over and over. Graham Weaver, the man she served without knowing who he really was, the owner of the entire restaurant chain. And he wanted to meet her. She arrived at the cafe he suggested, Willow and Vine, a quiet spot tucked away near the old courthouse. When she walked in, Graham was already seated near the window, a black coffee in front of him, and a leather folder on the table. He stood to greet her with a warmth that startled her. "Naomi," he said, "thanks for coming." She nodded slowly, still unsure what to expect. "I wanted to look you in the eye," he began, "and tell you something most corporate owners forget to say. Thank you. What you did, that's leadership. Real leadership. Not the kind that hides behind policies or numbers." She blinked, unsure how to respond. "I want you back," he said simply, "but not as a server." Her breath hitched. "I want you to manage that location, effective immediately." Naomi's mouth parted, but no words came out. He slid the folder across the table, an offer letter. "You don't have to say yes now," he added, "but I've seen what's broken. I need someone who can fix it." By the time Naomi stepped back into Harvest Table, everything felt surreal. She wasn't in uniform. She wasn't holding a tray. She wore a charcoal blazer over her blouse, part of the new manager's wardrobe Graham had personally arranged. But the eyes that greeted her were the same. Tristan stared like he'd seen a ghost. Kylie's jaw dropped. And Paul Langston still clocked in, still acting like king of the castle, froze in his tracks. When he saw her walk through the double doors, "I need to speak to all staff," Naomi announced calmly. Murmurs spread. No one moved. Then Graham stepped in behind her, silent but commanding. The whispers died instantly. Paul turned. "Mr. Weaver, I wasn't told you'd be visiting today." "I'm not visiting," Graham said. "I'm auditing." He motioned toward Naomi. "Effective immediately, she's your new general manager." Paul's face turned a strange shade of red. "You can't be serious," he sputtered. "I'm completely serious," Graham replied. "And you're terminated." Paul lunged forward. "This is ridiculous. She's a server. She's not qualified. She's more qualified than you ever were," Graham said quietly. "Now please leave the premises." And just like that, everything changed. The first days were brutal. Naomi knew walking back in as a manager would stir resentment, but she hadn't expected the venom behind every glance Tristan gave her. Clipped responses. Kylie rolled her eyes during meetings. Even the kitchen crew kept their distance, unsure if this was temporary or some corporate stunt. But Naomi didn't flinch. She showed up early, stayed late, and rolled up her sleeves. When the grill backed up, she jumped in. When the dishwasher quit, she helped rinse. When the POS system crashed, she fixed it herself. What stung most was the silence, how people she once called coworkers now avoided eye contact, not out of fear but out of pride. But Naomi didn't want control. She wanted change. She printed new tip distribution sheets, ensuring fairness. She introduced anonymous feedback forms and adjusted the schedule to be more balanced. Slowly, the staff realized she wasn't just here to wear a badge, she was building something better. Even Darius noticed the shift in her voice when they spoke. "You sound taller," he joked over the phone. Naomi laughed. "Maybe it's the blazer." But deep down, she wasn't sure if she was growing into this role or barely holding on. The backlash wasn't just passive, it turned ugly. First, Naomi noticed the register was off by $40. Then customers started complaining about cold food, incorrect orders, and being overcharged. At first, she thought it was just chaos from the transition. But then she saw a pattern Kylie was involved in. Every mistake Tristan was logged in for, every altered transaction. And worst of all, someone had left a note in her office drawer. "Go back to waiting tables. You don't belong here." Her hands shook as she read it. She wanted to call Graham, wanted to tell him what was happening, but she knew what people would say, that she wasn't ready, that she cracked under pressure. So she stayed silent. She investigated, she reviewed login histories, examined printed receipts, interviewed the morning crew, and double-checked delivery logs. And then she saw entries tampered with late at night. The same shift, the same user ID, Tristan, the person who used to laugh with her during slow shifts, was trying to push her out, and he wasn't working alone. It was nearly 11 p.m. when Naomi confronted Tristan in the staff hallway. She held the printed logs in one hand, the register discrepancy report in the other. Why, she asked, voice low but steady. Tristan crossed his arms. You think you deserve that office? You think this place runs better under your little fairness model? I think customers deserve honesty, she said, and employees deserve to be treated with respect. He smirked. Respect doesn't keep doors open. Money does. You're bleeding this place, Naomi stared at him. You're sabotaging the restaurant just to make me look bad. I'm preserving it, he hissed. This is how it always worked. We hustle the high tippers, we skip the rest. That's how we survive. Not anymore, she said. Tristan laughed. You gonna fire me? No, Naomi replied, backing away. But Graham will. His face dropped, and this time she added, you'll be explaining it with every login, every voided charge, every name on this list. She held the papers up. Tristan's smirk was gone, and Naomi knew this wasn't just about power anymore. This was a war between what was and what should be. The next morning, Naomi submitted the evidence to Graham. He responded within 10 minutes. Handled, good work. Keep moving forward. By lunchtime, Tristan's locker was empty, his key fob deactivated. Word spread fast. Kylie, however, stayed. She walked around like nothing happened, lips tight, eyes sharper. Naomi noticed the shift. The passive resistance turned into something quieter, but colder, intentionally botched orders, whispers with new hires, and a smug look every time Naomi corrected a mistake. But the staff was changing. A few line cooks began to check in with Naomi before shifts. One of the cashiers, Gabriel, pulled her aside and said quietly, things feel cleaner. Naomi smiled. Good. That's the point, but then came a familiar voice. She was reviewing vendor logs when she heard it, arrogant, slick, and unmistakably smug Paul Langston, her former manager. He was standing in line like a customer chatting up the new hostess. Naomi froze, then she composed herself and walked to the front. Paul, she said flatly. He turned, grinning. Manager Ellis. Or is it acting manager? You shouldn't be here. I'm just here for lunch. No, she said. You're here to rattle me, but I'm not moving. He leaned in slightly. You may have won the floor, Naomi, but the game isn't over. The next 2 weeks were chaos wrapped in calm. Naomi had never seen customers so pleased. Repeat guests, clean feedback reports, even a bump in online reviews. Graham had sent her a message. This is the best quarter this store has had in over a year. You're doing something right. But behind the scenes, something was wrong. Kylie started showing up early, not just early before Naomi, and she was hanging around the computer system claiming to check stock or review register balances. Then one morning the inventory was off. Not by a little, by $1 and $200 worth of protein. Naomi's heart sank. She checked the records. Orders had been placed, but items never received. Supplier confirmed no such orders were made. The digital signatures. Naomi didn't hesitate. She called her into the office. I know what you've been doing, she said. You're running fake entries, sabotaging delivery logs, and hoping I'll take the fall. Kylie's mask cracked for a second. Then calmly she replied, You can't prove it. Naomi tapped the folder. I already have. She stood. You're done here. Kylie didn't argue, just smiled. You think you're safe now, she said. You have no idea what's coming. Then she walked out without even grabbing her jacket. 3 days later, Naomi was summoned downtown. Graham had arranged a meeting at Weaver Foods corporate, requesting her presence before the board. The invite was vague, but the tone clear, urgent. She wore her best blazer, brushed her hair back, and stepped into the sleek elevator with her heart pounding in her ears. Inside the boardroom, Graham stood at the head. 6 other executives sat around a long glass table. There was coffee folders, laptops, but no smiles. Naomi, Graham said as she entered. Thanks for coming. She nodded, unsure whether this was a firing squad or a promotion. One woman older, in a sharp crimson blazer, gestured toward a seat. We've reviewed recent activity at your location. It's been unusual. Unusual good or unusual bad? Naomi asked, surprising even herself with the courage in her voice. Both, Graham answered. He flipped a folder open. Sales are up 18%, customer satisfaction at 91%. But 2 terminations, 1 theft case, and internal sabotage in 3 weeks. That's not a small storm. Naomi spoke evenly. No, it's not, but storms clear the air. And now you can actually see the restaurant. The room went silent. Then the woman in crimson smiled. She's right. By the time Naomi returned to Harvest Table, she had a letter in her hand, not a reprimand, a formal promotion. Graham had recommended her as regional training lead with oversight of not just her store, but 5 others across the state. The letter offered a raised travel stipend, a future she never imagined, but she didn't celebrate yet. She had one more thing to do, standing before the staff, new servers, cooks, and a few veterans who'd survived the chaos. Naomi laid out a new vision. She introduced integrity check-in forms, started weekly feedback huddles, and pushed through policies that ensured fair treatment for every guest and every worker. This isn't just a job, she told them. It's where people learn what respect feels like. The response wasn't thunderous applause, but it didn't need to be. It was Oz. Eye contact, trust. Later that night, Darius called Naomi. Did you hear you're on the company blog? She hadn't. He read the title aloud. From Waitress to Regional Leader. How one act of kindness changed everything. Naomi smiled. I didn't do it for attention, she said. I know, Darius replied. That's why it matters. The next afternoon, a plain white envelope appeared on Naomi's desk. No return name, no logo. She opened it slowly, and inside was a single piece of paper. No threats, no slurs. Just one line, you took something that didn't belong to you. Don't think it's over. Naomi's breath caught. She recognized the handwriting. Paul Langston. She set the letter down, hands steady. For a moment, she stared out the window at the evening sky turning gold over the city skyline. Then she turned, locked the letter in her desk drawer, and picked up the phone. Graham, she said when he answered. Yes. Put security cameras in all 5 locations, she said calmly. And I want employee login systems upgraded. There was a pause. Understood, he said. Because Naomi Ellis didn't just survive betrayal. She turned it into the blueprint for something better. And she was just getting started. 1 week later, Naomi visited her first regional store as a training lead. Oakfield branch was the polar opposite of what she had built. Low morale, absentee management, and a whisper culture of just do the minimum. When Naomi walked in, her presence drew glances. Some curious, others wary. She was used to it by now. The kitchen was a mess. The back fridge wasn't cleaned. The morning prep had been skipped. But what struck her most wasn't the disorganization. It was the resignation in the staff's eyes. Like they had stopped believing things could ever change. Naomi didn't storm in or bark orders. She rolled up her sleeves, cleaned the prep table, took a shift on the floor. The staff was stunned. You don't have to do that, said Benji, a young line cook with sleeves rolled high and a cigarette tucked behind one ear. Yes, I do, Naomi said. Because if I don't show you what good leadership looks like, why would I expect you to follow me? By the end of the day, people started smiling again. Naomi didn't demand loyalty, she earned it. But later that night, as she closed up, a message was scratched into her car door. Quit while you're ahead. Naomi filed a report with corporate security. Graham took it seriously, but she could tell it unsettled him. These threats, it's not just pushback anymore, he said over the phone. You want to step back a bit? Naomi looked out the window of her temporary rental in Oakfield. The street lamps buzzed. Her car, still scratched, sat silently under the glow. No, she said. I want to keep going. The next day, she gathered the Oakfield team. This store isn't failing because of bad workers. It's failing because no one believed in you. She paused. Until now, they leaned in, not physically but emotionally. Naomi introduced a new structure. Peer mentors, weekly check-ins, anonymous feedback channels. She didn't come to dictate, she came to rebuild. One by one, they started responding. Orders sped up, complaints dropped, sales ticked upward. But as progress rose, so did resistance. Later that week, a back door was left ajar. The register was accessed remotely. Over $700 disappeared. When the system logs came in, Naomi stared at the screen, Kylie. She'd used a still active admin code one Paul had helped her set up before his termination. And Naomi realized she wasn't just fixing a restaurant, she was unraveling a conspiracy. Naomi requested a secure video call with corporate compliance. But Graham didn't wait. He flew in. They met in a private conference room at the Oakfield location. The door closed, blinds drawn. Graham sat on one side of the table, Naomi on the other. Between them, a thick report of login activity, surveillance timestamps, and flagged transactions. She used Paul's access, Naomi said. This goes deeper than I thought. Graham flipped over the file, closed, and exhaled. We need to terminate her, and we need to call in legal. But Naomi shook her head. No, she said. Let me handle it. That afternoon, Naomi called Kylie to the break room of the original harvest table, the very place it all began. Kylie walked in, smugly arms crossed. I heard you're making waves. Regional Director Naomi placed the report on the table. You've been caught, she said calmly. Kylie's smirk wavered. I don't want revenge, Naomi added. I want honesty. Right now, were you working alone? A long pause, then no, Paul. Naomi asked. Kylie nodded slowly, and one more. Naomi's pulse ticked faster. Who? Kylie looked her dead in the eyes. Someone in corporate. Naomi sat across from Graham later that night. The report still fresh in her hands. She said, someone on your team is involved, Naomi said. Graham didn't blink. Who? She wouldn't say. But I believe her. They sat in silence. For the first time, Graham looked uncertain. Naomi, if this is true, he said carefully, it means someone is trying to sink this company from the inside. I know, she said, but I'm not walking away. They launched a full audit of internal systems, every login, every approval, and it showed up just once. A single back-end approval from a regional finance officer, the same officer who had once blocked Naomi's hiring paperwork when she was promoted, the same one who had backed Paul. Naomi's guts sank. Graham leaned forward. We bring this to the board, and when this ends, we restructure completely. Naomi nodded. Then let's end it. But before she left the building that night, she saw a black SUV idling outside the back lot. She didn't stop. She walked straight toward it. The window rolled down, and there sat Paul. You think you're safe, he said quietly. No, Naomi replied. I think I'm ready. Then she turned her back on him and walked away. The next morning, Naomi presented her case before the board of Weaver Foods. She wasn't corporate polished. She didn't bring PR slides. She brought receipts. Kylie's statement, login history surveillance from Oakfield. And then calmly, she told the story of the man she served for free months ago, the act that got her fired, and the moment that began everything. You gave me a chance, she said to Graham, because I saw a human being, not a customer ID. That's what leadership is, and that's what we're going to fight for inside every store. When she finished, there was silence, then applause. Quiet at first, then growing. The board voted unanimously to terminate the mole in finance and begin a full corporate overhaul. Paul Langston was banned from all affiliated properties. Naomi was promoted again this time, officially Director of Culture and Operations over every location nationwide. That evening, she stood in the empty harvest table dining room, the lights dimmed, the silence familiar. She ran her hand across the countertop where she'd once carried plates, once wiped ketchup stains, and she whispered to no one in particular, I'm still here. 3 weeks later, Naomi's new title was official. Director of Culture and Operations wasn't just a promotion, it was a mission. Her first act, a nationwide listening tour. One store at a time, she showed up unannounced, dressed in neutral tones, blending in like she always had. She didn't speak first. She listened to dishwashers, line cooks, new hires, and veteran servers. Some didn't trust her right away. Some thought she was corporate with a clipboard and no soul, but then they learned. She asked about their hours, their tips, their safety. She followed up. Took notes. Made changes at the Lexington branch. A teenage cashier named Raina pulled her aside and said, You're not like the others. You actually see us. Naomi smiled. That's the job. But behind the scenes, she still had to navigate firestorms. Resistance from stubborn franchise owners, pressure to keep profits high and quiet, murmurs from the board wondering if her empathetic approach was scalable. Naomi kept showing up. She proved them wrong with numbers and humanity. But one night while closing her laptop, she received an email from an address she hadn't seen in weeks. This isn't over. Naomi didn't flinch. She hit delete and moved on. It was a rainy Thursday when Darius called Naomi. He said, voice buzzing through her earbuds as she walked through a terminal on her way to a leadership summit. Guess what? Tell me, she replied, weaving past travelers with her coffee in hand. I got into MIT's grad program, robotics and social impact track. Naomi stopped walking. I thought we couldn't afford scholarship. He cut in a full ride. Because of the research I submitted, because you kept me fed and housed when I had nothing. Her throat tightened. You did that. Dino, he said softly, you did while rebuilding an empire with your bare hands. She leaned against a wall, pressing her hand to her face. For the first time in a while, she let the tears fall freely. Not from grief, from pride. That night in her hotel room, she opened her laptop and created a private scholarship fund under a new initiative, the Ellis Program, a grant for hourly workers supporting dependents through education. She named it after her mother, and her brother never found out until he was the first recipient. 2 months later, Naomi received a surprising request. A TED-style conference in Los Angeles wanted her to speak from table to transformation, how one meal rewrote a company. She almost declined, but something inside her, the part that remembered how it felt to be voiceless, invisible, pushed her to say yes. Standing under the lights, her hands slightly trembling, Naomi looked out at the crowd of executives, investors, activists, and workers. "I didn't plan to become a leader," she said. "I just refused to let silence define me." She spoke of policy, yes, but also about humiliation, power imbalance, and the price of kindness in a system that sometimes punishes it. She ended with the line that stuck with the crowd for weeks. Change doesn't start at the top, it starts with the person who picks up the tray. Afterward, the line to speak with her was long. Not from CEOs, from servers, cleaners, prep cooks. One woman hugged her and whispered, "You gave us permission to believe we matter." That night, Naomi wrote in her journal, "I thought survival was the goal, but maybe it was just the beginning." 6 months later, Naomi received one last letter. Mailed, no return address. But she recognized the handwriting. Paul Langston. She stared at the envelope for a full minute before opening it. Inside was no threat, just a simple, shaky note. "You were right. I let power make me cruel. You weren't just better than me, you were braver. I hope someday I learn what that feels like." There was no signature, just a letter and a receipt tucked inside. A receipt from a small cafe in Chattanooga. Total $8.64. Tip $50. Server's name, Brenda. Naomi sat with it for a long time. Maybe redemption wasn't always dramatic. Maybe it was just one man learning to tip better, and one woman choosing not to hold on to hate. She folded the letter and placed it in a drawer beside her first offer letter from Graham. Not to remember Paul, but to remember how far she'd come. 1 year later, Naomi returned to Harvest Table, the original location, for a surprise staff appreciation day. The walls were newly painted, the uniforms upgraded, but the heart was still there. She stepped behind the counter, brewed coffee like she used to, and greeted the first customer by name. When she walked to the break room, she found a hand-drawn sign taped to the fridge. "Naomi built this." In her office now hung a photo of the old crew before the reckoning. It wasn't a reminder of pain. It was a record of change. As she closed her shift log that evening, a young hostess approached her nervously. "Miss Ellis," Naomi turned, smiling. "Yes, I've been thinking about quitting, but now I want to stay because of you." Naomi reached out, touched her shoulder gently. "Then stay," she said, "and build something better than I ever could." She walked out of the restaurant into the evening breeze, no longer carrying the weight of who she used to be. She had fought the system and won, but more importantly, she had changed it. For everyone who came after kindness isn't weakness. In a world that rewards profit over people, Naomi proved that integrity still matters. She didn't just rise, she rebuilt a broken system, because real leadership isn't about control. It's about courage, and the quiet ones, they change everything.